Hi, welcome to another episode of Swarajya Conversations.
Today we have with us Dr. Charan Singh. Dr. Charan Singh is the Chief Executive of EGROW Foundation.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, for sparing your precious time for Swarajya.
Thank you very much for having me over.
So, the budget 2021 is almost here, just a week from now. It's a very unusual time for a budget to come up because we have had the pandemic, the lockdown, the contraction in the GDP. So, first things first, there have been a lot of reforms in the previous months. What are your thoughts on it?
One thing is there, this is going to be a very unique budget. The finance minister has also mentioned about it, and the circumstances are also very, very unique. It's once in 100-year time that a pandemic like this happens. The world is flattened, everybody is in the same situation, and therefore the budget has to be really unique and has to be made in a very, very scientific way. The finance minister having mentioned that it will be growth oriented, I totally agree with that. India is blessed to have a demographic dividend. We have a very young population. To increase growth, two things are necessary. One is the labor, one is capital. Once labor is available in abundance, India is a good destination. Foreign capital also comes in, and we are an emerging country. The banks play an important role in providing capital for growth, for industry, and for services. Now the time is we need to bring them all together so that we can achieve high growth. India was amongst the fastest growing economies of the world before COVID hit us. We have to resume that trajectory and that growth path. Budget is not only a statement of accounts. It should not be seen as a statement of accounts. It is the policy of the government as to how to take the country to the vision that the government provides. I always look at a fiscal policy, of which budget is one instrument, as a long-term vision statement. The long-term vision statement which the Prime Minister sets is what is that has to be achieved. The Prime Minister has set a $5 trillion economy by 2024 and a $10 trillion economy by 2030. That is the vision. To achieve that vision, the budget has to move, and the budget has to bring both capital and labor together. And the fiscal policy's key objective is to ensure employment and growth takes place. The monetary authority takes care of the inflationary pressure. Keeping this in mind, I feel that the government will make a budget which is employment oriented, also takes care of the slide in growth that has taken place and to revive it. That means different sectors of the economy which have been impacted by COVID, they have to be addressed, and those new sectors which have to be identified, which can take the growth trajectory back to 8% and 9%, will have to be boosted. So I think the government has a huge important task on its hand in this very year. Once the government sets the ball rolling for the next few years, because pandemic is coming under control, we also have a vaccine now, and this, once it rolls out, our circumstances will normalize, growth should start taking shape, and the budget has to position itself now that yes, the $5 trillion economy dream has to be nursed and has to be achieved.
Right. So I'll come to the sector since you mentioned banking and unemployment. I'll come to that. But first, I want to know your budget wish list from 2021. Because as you said, this will be a very unique budget. So there must be some particular sectors you're looking forward to in this budget. So if I talk about your budget wish list, what are those particular aspects you're looking forward to in this year's budget?
So that's a very good question. I should say that since the pandemic hit the country, the government has done an extensively good job. How do I know that? Look at the mortality rate that India has vis-a-vis the rest of the world. Just imagine what was being predicted in March and April, and everybody said that the Indians are going to be devastated, their mortality is going to be the highest, nobody is caring for the COVID, and nobody is prepared. And now you look, we are amongst the best performing countries in the world. in terms of the mortality rate. Secondly, the growth path. The government, the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, throughout this lockout period and lockdown and the pandemic period, have been repeatedly coming with various schemes which have propped up the economy, and the recovery in the economy now is almost V-shaped, which is unheard of. Look at the other countries. So what did the government do? The government made announcements in almost every sector of the economy to keep the economy moving and popping it up. The banking sector reforms were done. The MSMEs were supported. Non-bank finance companies were supported. Mudra loans were supported. And for the hawkers, the unorganized sector, special schemes were announced. Consequent to all these schemes that the government announced, you find that the recovery in the economy, which had suffered nearly 24% negative growth in the first quarter, bounced back. And now one can see the glimmer of hope, and maybe we'll be in slight positive zone by the time January to March figures are compiled. Continuing in the same strategy, I think the government, and my wish list now, the government will have to do many things. One of the things that I think is we have to revive the economy. To revive the economy, we have to ensure capital reaches at the right place. Now we have amongst the best regulator, Reserve Bank of India in the world. It's done a fascinating job, be it the Asian crisis, be it the 2008 crisis, be it COVID. They've been pretty active and supporting the system, providing liquidity when it is required, reducing the repo rates when it is required. They've done a fantastic job. Our commercial banks have also done a great job. They've supported everything that the government wanted us to do. If you look at the last mile, the people, they are also supported in a big way. The people by self-help groups, microfinance institutions, joint liability groups. But there is one segment of the society which depends largely on the non-banking finance companies.
Right.
Now, government has been supporting the non-banking finance companies, but I think that needs to be strengthened. As I told you, I don't look at budget as a statement of account. I look at a budget as a policy instrument trying to achieve the vision set by the Prime Minister. So if we have to achieve a $5 trillion economy, it's important to strengthen the non-banking finance sector. Therefore, I have recommended that there should be a national level institute on non-banking finance companies. That means, like for the banking in 1969, when banking was at its infant stage and we had started nationalizing, we had the National Institute of Bank Management. For the cooperative banks, about 1 lakh of them in number, to standardize, train people, we have the College for Agriculture Banking in Pune. Similarly, now we have to nurture our non-banking finance companies. I would like to mention that if you look in the USA, shadow banks, equivalent of our non-banking companies, are 50% of the total financial assets. In our country, they are just about 13%. So that's the most important thing. I think if we are able to strengthen, standardize our non-banking finance companies, we'll find that the money being given to hawkers, small MSMEs, and those people, the money starts flowing and growth starts taking place. So therefore, National Institute of Non-Banking Finance Companies would be the foremost thing in my mind. Now, also remember that to fund this growth and the recovery and the revival, because tax collection is going to be short,
Yes.
obviously. And if you look at the pandemic trend, this is obvious in many countries. Empirically, if you look at the 1918, the revenue collection takes time. GST has started improving, but for other taxes, I'm not sure how quickly they will revive. So the government will have to borrow extensively. I would say the second thing, that the country need not worry too much about the gross fiscal deficit and debt to GDP ratio. I'm not suggesting profligacy, but I'm saying the sanctity of 3% of deficit to GDP ratio, sanctity of 60% of debt to GDP ratio, is not established anywhere in the world. It comes from the Maastricht Treaty, comes from the vast experience, empirical evidence, but these are not normal times. Rating agencies understand this. Most countries in the world have breached these limits, so we should not be shy of breaching these limits. Related to this again, if we are going to do increased borrowing, we may have to go for monetizing some of our deficit. We should not be shy. Look at what happened in America and Europe, England. After the 2008 crisis, their balance sheets have expanded. Inflation hasn't happened. So the fear of having high deficit or fear of having high monetary deficit resulting in inflation is empirically not proven in these times. Now, the third most important thing related to this very aspect is if we are going to borrow so extensively, we need to separate debt from monetary management. The monetary management should be left to only look at the money supply and interest rates, and debt management, so that over a period of time, we are able to optimize the maturity pattern, and the cost should be assigned to a separate body, and that should be scrutinized. So therefore, I would recommend as a second major policy issue that we separate debt from the monetary management. I have a few more thoughts. If you have time, I can share them.
Please, sir,
Can-
please.
So, when I speak about reviving the economy and sectoral reviving the economy, one area which I have in mind is the housing sector. Now,
Right.
housing has forward-backward linkages with nearly 275 industries. Now, in our country, we have the economically weaker sections and low-income groups. And suppose I go to buy an iPhone, I get a zero rate of interest in these times. I go to buy even a car, they're going to give me EMIs at zero rate of interest. Now, it is in my interest to revive the economy, and you know that housing is labor intensive. So if I have to engage my labor, one suggestion I would make to the government is why not introduce for a limited time and compensation through direct benefit transfer on the time when registration of the house takes place, zero interest rate loans for 2 years on houses for economically weaker section and low income. You will find it will give boost to 275 industries. Similarly, in our country, we have emotional attachment, but I think a time has come to even talk of reverse mortgage of houses. When you do reverse mortgage of houses, you pump in purchasing power in the hands of the house owners. Most of them are elderly. Many of them, their children are abroad. So I think we need to monetize our housing assets. And if somebody is living in a house, pump purchasing power in their hands by reverse mortgage. Similarly, many houses are built and the stock of built up houses, locked houses is very large. We
Yes.
need to do something about them. There are schemes where we can monetize them and bring them into the rental market by assuring certain returns and safety so that the owners feel like renting their house. In the same line, I would like to say the government was encouraging a few months back saying that please go on tourism things. The tourism has suffered the most in our country. Now, I have a suggestion there. Elderly and pensioners and retired people have been lying locked in the houses, while the serving ones are busy to safeguard their jobs, working hard. The government can consider providing LTC for pensioners. Where will the pensioners go? Elderly people will generally go for religious tourism. Now,
Right.
there the capital has no more capital is required. The temple exists, the priest exists. But by ensuring 1 month, say, of pension, permitting it for tax deduction, so government does not have to forego any money on this LTC. It only foregoes some tax collection. It can save the elderly go on religious tourism, and we allow them to go, we'll allow them 1 month pension as tax deduction. By virtue of that, what will happen? Railways, airlines, automobiles, taxis will start. people will start going out of the home, and that would be really important in reviving demand and also encouraging, at least moving the country towards normalcy. One last point I want to make to you is, that the fiscal situation in the country during such times is always challenging.
Yes.
There will be people who will dispute everything that the government does, means that is part of their survival instinct. I am suggesting let's have a permanent fiscal institution in the country instead of having every 5 years the finance commission. See, the country has experimented with monetary policy committee, which meet regularly, and it has thinkers. The country could experiment with a fiscal policy committee to begin with and move on to a permanent fiscal commission in the country, a fiscal institution which takes care of nitty-gritties, which takes care of subsidies, which takes care of issues like MSP, which takes care of oil prices, and those issues can be given to the Permanent Finance Commission to dwell upon. So that will smoothen the relationship with the citizens in the country, and this can be replicated both at the center and at the state level.
Right. So last question I want to come to is about agriculture. Because if you're talking about boosting the demand, boosting the economy, something which 600 million people directly and indirectly depend on, which is agriculture. Now the farm laws came, they was told that's a different story, but we're expecting more rollouts for agriculture in the coming budget because of all the political situation we have right now. So 2 points. One, what is your opinion on these farm laws which were introduced by the government? And two, what should the government do more apart from these farm laws or something to complement these farm laws to double the farmers' income? Because the Prime Minister has often said he wants to double the farmers' income. Agriculture growth has to improve, the agri economy has to improve, and people have to gradually shift out of agriculture for the agri economy to improve. So what are your thoughts on that?
So this is an issue that is really very perplexing. The whole country for the last couple of months has been debating the pros and cons of the farm laws. My suggestion would be very simple. With hindsight, one can come out with great suggestions, right? But what I'm going to do is share with you some of my thoughts based on my age-related experiences. And experience that I've worked in different places. I was a commercial banker before I joined the Central Bank of the country as the Reserve Bank of India. I worked in the Reserve Bank of India before I joined the International Monetary Fund, and then I've come back to the country. Based on my experience, a limited experience, if you can say, I'm going to share some thoughts with you. One is the Parliament is here to make laws. The Supreme Court is here to interpret and implement those laws. I am now realizing we need a dispute resolution commission. There is every possibility that some part of the country is not happy with the law that has been produced. Before even it goes for interpretation and implementation in the Supreme Court, we may need a dispute resolution commission where the citizen is not satisfied with the law that has been passed, and the dispute resolution commission should be very well represented by the state representation, maybe a parliament representation, maybe professors in various fields. It could easily have 51 members, nothing wrong with that. And the dispute resolution commission should be able to ensure the citizens that in case they are not happy with something which is done in the constitution, this is a suggestion that I am thinking we need to take care. I would also now move to the second point. When we say we want to double farmers' income, farmers are doing many things. They are into pisciculture, floriculture, they're into many activities which are allied activities related to agriculture. We need to take care of that also. The third point, the minimum support price which we give has to be evenly distributed across the country.
Right.
It should not be concentrated. It should not be concentrated in certain crops and in certain geographical areas. There is no harm in providing minimum support price for a limited time on one crop and at another time to another crop. Because our resources are limited, minimum support price becomes an important element in subsidies. And because our resources are limited, our capacity to even subsidize is limited. So to encourage certain areas, to encourage certain commodities, we could laser beam our subsidy to one crop for 5 years in one geographical region. And then for even distribution of benefits and equitable distribution of resources, we could move the subsidy to another crop in another geographical region. Because at the end of the day, the whole country has to develop, and regions across the country have to develop, and commodities have to develop. Now, as you know, in one part of the country, the water table is depleting rapidly because, because the policies that were initially done for the last 30 years were not motivated by economic forces, but motivated for political reasons. Now, because of that, the water table depleted, the soil quality also very badly depleted. There are studies which show that the water from the ocean is seeping in because the water tables are depleting. Water from the ocean is seeping in, and which were considered very fertile lands could now become deserts.
Yes.
When we speak as an economist, we have to think in terms of long-term growth. We have to think in terms of intergenerational growth. We have to think in terms of sustainable growth. Only then we can achieve steady growth. The life of an individual at the maximum is about 50 to 100 years. Life of a nation is thousands of years. The quality of soil, the water, these things are natural resources, and we have to ensure what we got from our previous generations is gifted, enhanced to the future generations. So therefore, I think much more thought has to be given before we take decisions, and the sustainability of the economy, sustainability of the soil, sustainability of the ecosystem has to be considered. Places where cropping patterns were very strong, 24 to 30 crops were grown in a region just because of the MSP. They have now reduced to 2 crops. It's
Yes.
neither ecologically the right approach, nor environmentally a friendly approach, nor sustainable on long-term basis. So therefore, I think everybody has to apply their mind and thought as to the country is larger and bigger than any individual. So one has to balance and go forward. Now, while going forward, reforms are always difficult. If you have to reform yourself, you know how difficult it is. You know how many spiritual teachers are on the job to help individuals reform themselves, and still they can't reform themselves. And these are the vices, the addictions that you and me are aware of. When we have to revive a society, the challenges are compounded and become far more bigger. So
Right.
I consensus building, debating, raising issues, accommodating each other, understanding, providing time to reform, providing time to change, these all should be factors which have to be considered in the country. And that's the only way the country will progress. We are not only looking at 2021, 22, we have to look firstly at the global picture, where we want to be, where our grandchildren and great grandchildren should be. We have to position themselves over there, and for that, we will have to undertake reforms. Reforms will be, some will be easy, some will be difficult. Reforms now, the agriculture sector reforms, the labor reforms are challenging. Everybody has to think through them and position themselves that if this is the vision we want to achieve, what is the pathway that we have to follow? To
Right.
conclude, we have to modernize agriculture. The government alone cannot modernize agriculture. Private sector will have to play a role in it. And therefore, if private sector has to play a role, they can't be told to do charity. They have to get returns for the investment that they make. So therefore, if we want to become America, which is totally private sector driven, we cannot then say that we will follow the socialist pattern but become America. No country has achieved that. No country can achieve that. So therefore, one has to accommodate the private sector along with us. The private sector is also to understand that why some private sector institutions find more acceptability than others. Steel cities have been built, and magnanimity of those industrialists have been acknowledged. The private sector has also to understand how to find acceptability and then help the country move forwards.
Right.
We are fortunate. We have trade associations which are generally driven by the private sector. And I think the whole country has to think when hard decisions have to be taken, where tough reforms have to be undertaken, all the sectors in the country, all individuals in the country have to think carefully what the vision is, how to achieve that vision, and what is the pathway.
Right. Thank you so much, sir, for those wonderful insights on the budget and on the overall economy and the vision for the overall economy as we move forward. Thank you so much for your time for Swarajya. Thank you.
Thank you.